about 18 facilities, some of the largest facilities in the Gulf of Mexico, producing 75% of the oil out of the Gulf of Mexico. That's more oil than the whole state of North Dakota produces.
My name is Michael Mauceli, and this is the Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're going to be talking about permitting. My guest is Eric Milito. Eric is the president of the National Ocean Industries Association, and we're going to be talking about Kamala's recent flip-flops on fracking. But does it matter if the government regulators and judges are shutting down the permitting process? Great to have you on the show today, Eric. So, Eric, you're the president of the National Ocean Industries Association. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the association and a little bit about actually exploration in the Gulf of Mexico?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, Michael. The National Ocean Industries Association is the voice and advocate for the offshore energy sector. We've been around more than 50 years. Most of that time, we've been serving as the representative and advocate, mainly in D.C., with Congress and the administration for the Gulf of Mexico oil and gas sector. More recently, we've been engaged in offshore wind, and we're now working on offshore minerals, critical minerals, as well as offshore carbon sequestration. So we've kind of broadened our horizons a bit, but we're primarily a group that makes sure that here in the U.S., we have the ability to invest in offshore energy projects. Our membership includes the offshore operators, project developers, leaseholders, non-ops, as well as the supply chain. More than 60% of our membership is the supply chain, the fabricators, the marine construction companies, the subsea engineering and design companies, the service companies, and all the vessel companies. Of course, when we're doing marine construction, we need lots of boats. We represent them as well. And they have the expertise to build things in the offshore marine setting, which is why they can do oil and gas as well as wind and carbon sequestration and offshore mineral mining too. So we do a lot. We do it well, and we do it with effectiveness here in DC.
So are there still permits being issued in the Gulf of Mexico?
As far as we understand, nothing has been held up in terms of permitting in the Gulf of Mexico for oil and gas activities. That's a bit of an area of uncertainty given where the court decision came down. But from our understanding, we still have the processing of permits because right now everything is considered to be valid.
So when we talk about the Gulf of Mexico, and I've my experience offshore, I used to be in a consortium, with a turnkey arm. So we used to participate in offshore drilling. You're either going to drill in shallow water or you're drilling in deep water. How far out does the U.S., I guess, go as far as on the, what is the U.S. sovereignty?
Yeah, that's a great question. It might be good to back up just a little bit and talk about more broadly the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
And we got to appreciate that this is one of the premier producing regions in the world. And by that, we're looking at a basin that has been producing more than 1 million barrels a day since 1997, hit record production right before the pandemic, August of 2019, at more than 2 million barrels a day. And it's gotten back up to about 1.8 million barrels a day. And we believe that we could be producing 2.5 million barrels a day from the Gulf of Mexico. It's a tremendous region, still highly prospective. We've been there for 70 years, but we are continuing to discover new reserves, new opportunities to develop resources. Outside of Guyana, this might well be the second leading region when it comes to discoveries and adding on the billions of barrels to what we already know is there. We support more than 380,000 good-paying jobs. These jobs pay more than 30% higher than the national U.S. average job pays. And a lot of the money that comes from offshore goes to important programs like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, Coastal Resiliency. We provide revenues to the federal government in the range of $4 to $6 billion a year, and about $1 billion of that goes to conservation funding. A lot of that goes to even places like inner cities for their recreation and outdoor activities for urban youth programs. And then we also now have funding going to our national parks through the Great American Outdoors Act. So we have a region there that provides tremendous benefits. And finally, I'd like to add that if you're looking at decarbonization, the global economy uses oil. They use about 100 million. We use about 100 million barrels a day globally, about 20 million in the US. Gulf of Mexico is known and recognized to provide among the lowest carbon intensity barrels in the world. So if you're going to produce oil, if you produce it somewhere else, you're going to have higher emissions from operations than you do in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's just due to the technology, innovation, and scale of those operations. Now, if you look at that 1.8 million barrels that's being produced, about 92% or more of that comes from the deep water. And then the remaining comes from the shelf properties. So we still have a lot of production coming from the shelf. While it's a low percentage, that is an area where we have companies that have been able to continue to drill wells. I think some of the most active drillers are on the shelf, and they've been able to, increase production and tie it back to existing facilities. So it's very efficient, very cost effective. In the offshore, we have tremendous facilities producing 100 to 200,000 barrels of oil a day, and we have several new ones coming online. I mean, the maturity of the basin leads you to more and more discoveries and more production in those frontier areas in the deep water, 4,000 or 5,000 feet or more. But we can't forget about the shelf. The shelf continues to be a producing area.
Yeah. And as far as in the deep water, I guess there's still quite a bit of oil to be discovered there, right? That's relatively new production, correct?
Absolutely. You could see the trends and the discoveries, and they kind of follow along the recognized formations. One of those areas you can see on the map is the Norphlet Formation. And you can see the industry continues to invest in exploration activities and continues to find new discoveries along that trend line out in the what they call the central planning area that kind of gets closer to the eastern planning area of the Gulf of Mexico. But a lot of success. We've got a lot of projects coming online. We just saw the Anchor project start up production from Chevron. It's the first 20,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. And so it's a high temperature, high pressure project. We have more of those coming online with Shenandoah. We've got projects like that coming from BP and Shell as well. So we are advancing technology, and we're doing things that a lot of people would be surprised in terms of the innovation and technology of going, 5,000, 8,000 feet in the water, another 30,000 feet, high pressure, high temperature, all doing it safely and protecting the environment.
So why do you think the government regulators and the judges are creating all these obstacles if it's such a high producing area for the United States?
Well, it's the way our laws and regulations are set up. They've created a high level of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape. There's dozens of approvals, dozens and dozens of sets of regulations that apply, and they create many, many opportunities for an opponent to just file a lawsuit and see if they can get some kind of judge to step up and either shut down or delay or restrict our ability to produce. And it's a couple of statutes, the National Environmental Policy Act. It's an important law. At its core, the agencies in DC, the federal agencies that oversee any kind of activity, whether it's oil and gas or mining or building a bridge or building a federal facility. It could be anything. No matter, it's the military bases. Anytime there's a federal project that has to go through approvals in DC, they require there to be an environmental review. Makes sense. They want to understand what the consequences will be. They want to be able to have a document that lays out the alternatives and how to mitigate against environmental impacts. All makes sense. The problem is how easy it is to sue and how much easier and easier it seems to get for judges to find ways to throw out an environmental document, which sends the agency back to the drawing board and puts in jeopardy the investment. That's on the NEPA side. On the Endangered Species Act side, it's similar, where the judges will review the actual environmental review and impacts that pertain to the species that are endangered or to the species habitat. So you got NEPA that looks at the whole universe of environmental impacts. Then you've got the Endangered Species Act that looks at specific species and habitats, and they both have documents that end up getting subject to litigation, and it's become much easier for a judge to just throw something out, start from scratch, or put in jeopardy an entire multi-billion-dollar investment, which impacts our national security. We know what's happening globally around the world with conflicts in the Middle East and in Russia and everywhere else. We know how volatile oil prices can be, which impact consumers when you're looking at gasoline prices and everything we use in our daily lives. So we're looking at decisions that impact our national and energy security and the affordability of energy overall, and our employment of workers in high-paying jobs throughout the Gulf Coast and beyond.
Well, I think a lot of people don't really realize on some of these larger projects like, the deep water. I mean, those are 10-year projects, right? It's not something like a shale well you go out and you drill and 6 months down the road you're producing oil. So there's a lot of permitting that has to take place. There's a lot of environmental stuff, I'm sure, that has to go on. And it's to me, I mean, these companies are going to get to the point where they don't want to spend the money if they're not sure where the industry, where these politicians are going to go, with the industry, right? I mean, people hold back.
You've nailed it. This is one of the most regulated activities in the country, if not the world, every step of the way. You want to get a lease, they do significant reviews from the environmental side, from the side of whether or not our economy stands in a situation where we can utilize that energy. They look at any kind of impacts economically, environmentally. They're looking at social impacts. They're looking at everything. And that's just a lease sale. And then if you get a lease, you got to get permits and approvals for doing exploratory activity. Then if you want to move forward after you find some discoveries and determine that you have a commercially viable project, then you got to get your plans approved, and they have environmental reviews. And then if you're going to drill your wells, you got to get permits. And all those are reviewed not only with an eye toward environmental impacts, but they're looking at the design of the project. They're looking at the equipment you're using. They're looking at your drilling rigs. They're looking at your all the phases of your project. Everything gets reviewed. And the problem is we historically have had a very stable investment climate from a statutory and regulatory perspective. Now, with the expansive and kind of evolving nature of the judicial system, where it's been finding more and more ways to overturn government decisions, where we've seen an injection of additional uncertainty that is going to, as you said, put project developers and put oil and gas operators in a tough spot. And they have budgets that they can use anywhere around the world. You got projects off West Africa. You see what's happening in Guyana and Brazil, off South America. You've got Southeast Asia. You've got the Middle East. You still have North Sea. There are offshore oil and gas opportunities throughout the world. And of the 100 million barrels that's produced globally every day, about 25 to 30% of that comes from offshore. It's a very promising investment choice because you can produce massive amounts of oil and natural gas from a small environmental physical footprint. We know we've got about 18 facilities, some of the largest facilities in the Gulf of Mexico, producing 75% of the oil out of the Gulf of Mexico. That's more oil than the whole state of North Dakota produces. So we can produce a lot from a little. They cost a lot of money to produce these, to develop these projects, but you just are doing it at such a scale that it makes tremendous commercial sense to do that. I still view the Gulf of Mexico as highly prospective. I still view it as a very attractive investment region. I think we're going to get through some of these hiccups here and some of these bumps in the road with the government, but we're looking to Congress over the long term to create more certainty. We're looking at this in a bipartisan way because these laws, they impact everything. They impact oil and gas. They're going to impact wind. They're going to impact solar. They're going to impact any kind of low carbon project out there as well. And we think it makes sense to draw investment, to incentivize investment here in the U.S. And a way to do that is to fix these laws so that any kind of project doesn't have to deal with these types of hurdles.
Yeah, and so the politics behind it obviously is, like when Kamala comes out or Vice President Harris comes out and, she says she's flip-flopping on fracking now and that she's all behind it. But really when, the strong arm of the government is the EPA. And, even though they come out and they say these things they're going to do, they can sure tie it up for a long time with all these government regulations and, and environmental groups, right?
Yeah, and it's really an alphabet soup of agencies. Environmental Protection Agency, we saw the water discharge permit got held up last year for 6 months or so. That created great uncertainty. In this case, when you're looking at the most recent decision relates to a biological opinion. So the federal government is going to approve anything that could impact a species. They got to do a consultation. If it's onshore, if it's shale, New Mexico, North Dakota, Colorado, they go to the Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's Department of the Interior. But if it's offshore, they do the National Marine Fisheries Service, and that's who did the biological opinion for the Gulf of Mexico, which covers all activities. And then you've got the Department of the Interior for offshore. They have the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management on the leasing side. They have BSEE on the oversight of the operations. And all that falls under whatever administration is in charge and whatever agenda they have. We knew with President Biden coming in, he announced on the campaign trail and he announced on day one that he didn't want any more offshore leasing. And he actually has tried to do that this administration has, in many respects, refused to do lease sales until, one, the Louisiana court ordered it, and then two, Congress ordered it. So you could expect similar prioritization from another administration, such as the Harris administration, if they were able to win and get in office. And then, President Trump, on the other hand, has been talking about drill, baby, drill. So you could see different priorities from the different candidates right now. And we're trying to make sure they understand, and perhaps the flip-flopping will be here to stay, because we see energy production here in the U.S. as meaning energy and national security for the U.S. And that is so important now. We know what's happening around the world. We know what's happening in some cases here, even in the U.S., with some of the crime surges we've seen and some of the debates getting turned into kind of physical altercations and things like that. So we want to be strong from an energy standpoint, and we can do it. And think about what's happened over the past 2 weeks. Libyan production was cut and curtailed. Price of oil shot up. Happened twice. The Gulf of Mexico produces way more oil than Libya does. If we have a shock ultimately to the Gulf of Mexico, that could have a dramatic impact on the prices for consumers at the pump, on products, on everything, because that region feeds right into the refineries along the Gulf Coast that depend upon it. So it could be a dramatic impact to the consumers because reduced supply means increased prices from a fundamental economic standpoint. So we want any elected official to understand that we need all forms of energy. We need a lot of oil and gas for a lot more decades to come, and we should be producing that here in the U.S., and we need to get over these types of legal decisions by working together and resolving them.
I don't think our industry does a great job as far as actually informing people just how important oil and gas is to our everyday lives, and how, we've got over 6,000 products that are made from oil and gas. Our electricity, the majority of it is generated from natural gas, which is a very clean burning fuel. But I don't think the people really understand just how important it is, because they hear all this stuff and, it's a no-brainer to me. I mean, why would you not want to? But the climate activists, they seem to get their word out there a lot more than we do on our side.
Yes, and people around the world that suffer in poverty, in many respects, suffer in poverty because they also have energy poverty.
Yeah.
I think you look at the OECD countries, the advanced economies, the first world countries, you're looking at 1.4 billion people that have high standards of living because they have access to reliable, affordable, abundant supplies of energy. And that includes 60 to 70% coming from oil and gas, 80% coming from fossil fuels. Those other 6 to 7 billion people, they want to rise out of poverty, and they want access to energy, and they want access to affordable energy. So we got to think about it in terms of what we have here, and we can't take it for granted because it gives us our way of life and our standard of living. Energy lifts society, and we should try to work together to make sure the global society is able to rise up too, because we all want to lift each other, and that is something that will also help alleviate and eliminate and push down a lot of the conflict you see in the world, because a lot of that relates to people wanting to get out of poverty or stuck in poverty, and it just leads to conflict. So we have an opportunity to make sure that we're sending our natural gas around the world. That comes out of the Gulf Coast, and that has also been something that's impacted by federal policy where they've paused LNG permitting. We know that if you're burning natural gas, it's 50% less carbon dioxide that you have emitted from your power sources and from your power plants. And you also have a great reduction in a lot of other pollutants that impact the health of people around the world. So it's a no-brainer, and it's a head scratcher when you see LNG being limited in terms of us getting it out. Our allies want it. They've been coming here for years saying, we want to buy your gas. We don't want to buy Putin's gas. We stopped sending it out here, and then who gets more power and control? Putin and others in the Middle East. So there's so many benefits of producing it here in the U.S. We can export oil, we can export refined product, we can export natural gas, and we can do that in a way that is responsible, where we know that we have the strongest regulatory regimes and the best operators, and we can make sure that other people around the world are getting the benefit of affordable, abundant supplies of energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we have so much natural gas here in the country. I think I saw yesterday out in West Texas that was, you had to pay the gas company to take your gas because we just have so much of the stuff. And it's a shame that we can't be using it for LNG because obviously, countries like Australia, I mean, they're just going to take the market share, right? If we don't produce it, I mean, they're going to end up taking our clients.
Absolutely. And we know that when you have low-cost natural gas and low-cost petroleum products, you bring manufacturing investment because energy costs are such a big capital expense for manufacturing. And we've been able to see that happen through the shale revolution. We've seen companies come from all over the world because they're able to reduce their costs by running their plants in the U.S. There's so many benefits to U.S. energy production, and ultimately it helps Americans. I represent the companies, but the companies employ a lot of people, and then each company hires other companies. If you look at a project in the Gulf of Mexico, there's hundreds of companies involved as vendors. It just has a cascading effect. And the study we did shows that there are vendors in every state. All 50 states have companies that are getting business from oil and gas production out of the Gulf of Mexico. It has an extensive reach in terms of the suppliers and the services that are provided, and we want to keep that going.
So can you talk a little bit about the Energy Permitting Reform Act of 2024 and how that, is supposed to help the producer?
Yeah, so there's been several steps toward reforming permitting, and it goes back to the debt ceiling bill that kind of led to some changes in the speakership of the House, where Kevin McCarthy helped lead to make sure that the government was not facing the potential situation where we would not be able to honor our debts. But part of that bill included the Builder Act, a big portion of Congressman Garrett Graves' Builder Act. And what that did is it helped put some boundaries around the environmental reviews. So when we talk about permitting, permits come after they do the environmental reviews. So a lot of the reform focuses on getting those environmental reviews under NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, done in a more efficient way. Some of these documents end up being 10, 20,000 pages. They take 5, 10 years to complete. that doesn't create investment certainty. So that particular piece of legislation kind of reduced the number of pages. It also reduced the amount of time that an agency has to conduct its environmental review. So if they're going to do an environmental impact statement, they got to get it done in 2 years. If they're going to do a shorter environmental assessment, 1 year. And they also put some boundaries around the scope of the review. A lot of times, once the review is done and they issue the permit or they issue the leases, you get a lawsuit saying that the agency didn't do enough review. And then a judge will say, they'll look at everything in the world. It's a shotgun approach. We're going to challenge every aspect of a multi-100-page document. And ultimately, if they get the right judge and we get the wrong judge, a judge will find 2 or 3 things, and then he'll put the whole project in jeopardy. So they've tried to narrow the scope there as well. One area that was left out of that, and that Congressman Graves had included all along, was litigation reform. So the new permitting proposal, it's bipartisan. We've got Senator Manchin, who's the chair of the Senate Energy Natural Resources Committee. He's on his way out. He's working closely with Senator Barrasso out of Wyoming, who's the Republican, on a bipartisan bill that would, one, expedite permitting for our power grid nationally and regionally. It would create greater reliability in our power grid, creating redundancies, but also clean up some aspects of the litigation side where the challengers would have a shorter time period to file their lawsuits. The courts would have a set amount of time to get that done. And if they find deficiencies, the agencies would have a shorter amount of time to get those done. So you're kind of shrinking that layer of uncertainty to a finite amount of time rather than letting it linger. Because Senator Manchin's problem was with the pipeline going from West Virginia to the East Coast,
Right.
Mountain Valley Pipeline, and that bounced back and forth in litigation over and over and over again. And finally, he got legislation included to just approve it. That's the easiest way to get projects approved, getting Congress to say approve it. Otherwise, the agencies have to go through all these multiple layers of processing, this red tape, this bureaucracy, lots of different agencies, and finally you get a permit approved, then the courts get a shot at it. So the new permitting reform, we think, will clean a lot of that up. We support it. We think that it would be beneficial to all energy sources, and we're hopeful that by the end of the year, maybe after the election during lame duck, there will be some energy to get something done, because we want to build things, and we have a hard time building things in the country with this bureaucracy and this endless litigation we see.
Well, I'm with you. I hope we definitely get it all changed and we can get some, start moving forward again and supply the energy that, our country and the world needs. But Eric, it was great having you on today. I'd love to have you back in the future because I'd like to talk to you about offshore wind next time.
Oh, that'd be great. I'm always available. I appreciate you having me on, and I wish you all the best of luck, and fingers crossed that we're going to be in a good situation, hiring people with high wages and producing the energy we need out of the Gulf of Mexico.
All right. Well, you have a great day now. Thank you.
You too. Take care.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.